The packed courtroom gasps as Judge Eleanor Washington slowly removes her judicial robe, revealing her true identity to the shocked bailiff, who minutes earlier had violently shoved her to the floor, handcuffed her, and called her racial slurs, while the entire courthouse watched in horror. "Perhaps now, Officer Caldwell, you'll release these restraints," she says calmly, her voice echoing through the silent courtroom as blood trickles from her split lip. The revelation stuns everyone. This 57-year-old black woman is not just any judge, but the newly appointed Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. What led to this moment of extraordinary revelation, and how will justice finally be served in a system built on deep-rooted prejudice? If you believe in equal justice under law, hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's special episode reveals how this powerful woman turned systematic racism into a watershed moment for America. Chief Justice Eleanor Washington adjusted her simple beige cardigan and smoothed her gray-flecked hair, deliberately dressed in plain clothes for her annual Judicial Transparency Project. For 5 years now, she had visited local courts anonymously to observe how justice truly functioned when no one knew a Supreme Court justice was watching. Today's destination, Westbrook County Courthouse in rural Georgia, a region notorious for racial tensions and disparities in sentencing. She'd chosen this location after receiving multiple complaints from civil rights organizations about suspicious patterns in conviction rates. Eleanor checked her appearance one final time in her compact mirror. No makeup, no expensive jewelry, nothing that would give away her position as the most powerful judge in America. Perfect. Today she was simply Dr. Eleanor Johnson, education, researcher examining courtroom procedures for an academic study. The imposing red brick courthouse stood as a relic of the Old South, its Confederate monument still prominently displayed despite national controversies. Eleanor climbed the worn, marble steps, documentation ready. Inside, Bailiff Richard Caldwell immediately noticed her, his eyes narrowing as she approached the security checkpoint. "Purpose of your visit?" he demanded, not bothering with the courteous ma'am he'd just offered to the white woman ahead of her. "Good morning, I'm Dr. Eleanor Johnson, here to observe today's proceedings for a research study. I have authorization," she explained, extending her perfectly legitimate paperwork. Caldwell barely glanced at it, his lip curling slightly. "Stand aside for additional screening," he ordered, waving the next white visitor through with barely a glance at their identification. Eleanor maintained her composure as Caldwell subjected her to an unusually thorough wand screening, deliberately lingering over certain areas while other guards snickered. "Arms out wider," he barked, when she slightly adjusted her position. After the humiliating additional screening, she approached Court Clerk Thomas Hawkins to register her presence. "We're very busy today," Hawkins stated, without looking up from his computer. "Take a seat over there. I'll get to you when I can." Eleanor observed as 3 white visitors approached after her and were promptly assisted with smiles and efficient service. She waited 45 minutes before Hawkins finally acknowledged her again, sighing dramatically as if her presence was an imposition. Finally, inside courtroom 3, Eleanor settled into a back row bench, notebook ready. Judge Maxwell Peterson presided, a heavy-set man with thinning white hair and perpetual scowl. The disturbing pattern became immediately evident. White defendants received respectful address as Mr. or Ms., their cases heard with patient attention, their explanations considered thoughtfully. One white defendant who arrived late received a gentle reprimand. "We all run behind sometimes. Let's proceed." When a young black man was seconds late returning from a recess, Peterson slapped him with a contempt citation. Eleanor meticulously documented each disparity, her training allowing her to recognize numerous procedural violations that consistently disadvantaged minority defendants. During one case, a young black woman named Tasha Williams stood accused of shoplifting $27 worth of baby formula. The evidence was circumstantial at best. Store security had stopped her before she even left the building, claiming her behavior seemed suspicious. Tasha explained she had forgotten her wallet in her car and was walking to retrieve it. Judge Peterson scoffed visibly at her explanation. "We've heard that one before," he remarked, drawing knowing chuckles from the bailiff and clerk. Just as Peterson was about to pronounce an obviously excessive sentence, Eleanor's phone unexpectedly vibrated. She had sworn she'd silenced it, but the court's old-fashioned wooden benches amplified the sound in the quiet courtroom. Judge Peterson's gaze snapped toward her, his expression darkening. "Who dares interrupt my courtroom?" Earlier that morning, Eleanor had witnessed 3 white spectators whose phones had rung receive mere warnings. One elderly white woman had even answered her call with a whispered conversation before stepping out. None faced consequences. But now Peterson pointed directly at Eleanor. "Bailiff, identify that individual and bring them forward." Caldwell moved quickly, clearly enjoying the opportunity. "Stand up," he commanded Eleanor. She rose with dignity, apologizing sincerely for the disruption. "Your Honor, I apologize for the interruption. It won't happen again." Peterson's eyes narrowed. "Name?" When she identified herself as Dr. Johnson, his skepticism was immediate and obvious. "Doctor of what exactly? Disrupting my courtroom?" Several white spectators laughed. Eleanor felt increasingly unwelcome as Peterson interrogated her about her credentials and purpose, questioning the legitimacy of her research despite her flawless documentation. The tension in the courtroom grew as Peterson made snide comments about outside agitators and so-called academics studying perfectly fair procedures. Despite the mounting hostility, Eleanor remained determined to complete her observation. This was precisely why her judicial transparency project existed, to document the everyday injustices that would never occur if the participants knew they were being watched by someone with power. The contempt in Peterson's eyes made it clear. He saw not a distinguished jurist with 3 advanced degrees and a lifetime of service to the law, but simply another black woman he could intimidate with impunity. Eleanor gripped her pen tighter, continuing her notes even as she sensed the situation was about to escalate beyond her control. Judge Peterson's patience finally snapped when Eleanor requested to see the court's public records regarding sentencing statistics. "That's it. I've had enough of your disruptions and inappropriate questions. This court finds you in contempt. Bailiff, remove this woman immediately." The courtroom fell into stunned silence, many spectators exchanging confused glances. Her simple presence and one accidental phone vibration hardly seemed to justify such an extreme reaction. Bailiff Caldwell approached with alarming eagerness, hand already on his taser. Eleanor rose calmly, maintaining her dignity. "Your Honor, I apologize if my presence has caused disruption. I'll leave voluntarily without need for—" But Caldwell cut her off, grabbing her arm with unnecessary force. "Let's go," he growled, fingers digging painfully into her flesh. "Officer, please remove your hands." "I'm complying and will exit without physical force," Eleanor stated clearly, aware that several spectators had begun recording the interaction on their phones. Caldwell's grip only tightened as he leaned closer. "Listen here, you uppity," whispered, using a racial slur so vile Eleanor hadn't heard it directed at her since her childhood in 1960s Alabama. The word struck her like a physical blow, momentarily stealing her breath. Caldwell began dragging her toward the exit, his excessive force causing Eleanor to stumble. "She's resisting," he announced loudly, though she clearly wasn't. Without warning, he slammed her against the courtroom wall, the impact knocking the air from her lungs. Spectators gasped as Caldwell roughly spun her around, wrenching her arms behind her back, and applying handcuffs so tightly they immediately began cutting into her wrists. The brutal treatment triggered vivid flashbacks for Eleanor. Being denied entry to her white classmates' birthday parties as a child, the college administrator, who suggested she'd only been admitted because of quotas despite her perfect SAT scores, the law partners who assigned her to make coffee during her early career despite her graduating first in her class from Harvard. Law. Through all those indignities, Eleanor had maintained her composure, working twice as hard to be considered half as good. Now, decades later, despite reaching the pinnacle of the American judicial system, she was still being treated as less than human because of her skin color. The irony was both painful and infuriating, but Eleanor maintained her professional demeanor, knowing that revealing her identity now would only allow these officials to cover their tracks later. The courtroom had divided into factions. some spectators clearly horrified by Caldwell's excessive force, others nodding approvingly. One white woman stood up, protesting, "This is completely unnecessary. She wasn't doing anything wrong." Caldwell barked at her to sit down or face the same charges. Through it all, Judge Peterson simply continued with his docket, calling the next case as if nothing unusual was happening. "Your Honor," Eleanor called out firmly, "I am formally requesting that these proceedings be recorded and preserved as evidence." Peterson didn't even look up. "Get her out of here, Caldwell. Add resisting arrest and threatening an officer to the contempt charge." Eleanor maintained dignified silence as Caldwell paraded her through the courthouse corridors, deliberately, walking her past crowded waiting areas rather than using the more direct private exit. The public humiliation was clearly intentional. As they passed, she noted other officers watching with expressions ranging from discomfort to amusement. Not one intervened. Every step confirmed what civil rights advocates had reported about Westbrook County's justice system. It operated as a closed ecosystem of prejudice, protected by mutual silence. Helena's analytical mind catalogued each violation of procedure, each abuse of power, storing the information for what would eventually become a landmark Supreme Court case on judicial misconduct. For now, though, she was simply another black woman being manhandled by a system designed to break people who look like her. Have you ever witnessed an abuse of power that made your blood boil? Comment number 1 if you believe nobody should be above the law, even those wearing a badge or sitting on a bench. Like and subscribe if you stand for equal justice regardless of race or background. How far would this bailiff go once he had Eleanor in custody, away from public eyes? And what powerful forces in Westbrook County might already be mobilizing to protect their corrupt system from exposure? Stay tuned, as this powerful woman's ordeal is just beginning, and the worst injustices often happen behind closed doors. The holding cell was deliberately humiliating. A small windowless room with metal benches bolted to concrete walls, reeking of disinfectant, barely masking fouler odors. Eleanor sat perfectly straight, despite her painfully restrained arms, observing the disparate treatment of detainees. White individuals received prompt processing, courteous explanations of procedures, and offers of water or bathroom breaks. Black detainees were left waiting for hours, addressed by last names only, and met with eye-rolling impatience when they asked questions. One guard mockingly mimicked a young black woman's accent when she politely requested to make her phone call. Eleanor memorized his badge number, Officer Pearson, 4872. Each incident became another entry in her mental catalogue of violations. A young black man in his 20s sat down beside Eleanor, his expression a mixture of resignation and simmering anger. "First time in the Westbrook holding tank?" he asked quietly. "I'm Jamal Taylor, got arrested for resisting arrest during a traffic stop. Funny how that was the only charge." He explained that he'd been pulled over for allegedly running a stop, sign he knew he'd completely stopped at. When he politely questioned why he'd been stopped, the officer claimed he detected an attitude and ordered him from the vehicle. "Next thing I know, I'm face down on the pavement with a knee in my back, being told to stop resisting when I wasn't even moving." Eleanor listened intently, her judicial mind noting the constitutional violations. "Does this happen often here?" she asked. Jamal laughed bitterly. "Lady, this is Tuesday in Westbrook County. Been this way long as anyone can remember." As other detainees shared similar stories, a court officer named Marcus Reynolds entered, his eyes widening slightly upon seeing Eleanor. Unlike the others, he addressed her respectfully. "Ma'am, are you comfortable? Can I get you some water?" His unexpected courtesy created immediate tension with Caldwell, who had returned to check on the detainees. Getting soft on the troublemakers, "Reynolds," Caldwell sneered. Reynolds straightened his shoulders. "Just doing my job professionally, sir." After Reynolds departed, Caldwell approached Eleanor, leaning uncomfortably close. "Enjoying your accommodations, Doctor?" he taunted. "Hope you're learning your place in my courthouse." Eleanor maintained direct eye contact. "I'm certainly learning." "A great deal about Westbrook County's justice system, Officer Caldwell. It's all extremely educational." Something in her calm confidence unsettled him momentarily before his arrogance returned. Eleanor systematically memorized every detail: names, badge numbers, specific violations of procedure, timestamps of incidents. The holding cell became an unintentional forum, as other detainees, seeing her methodical approach, began sharing their experiences of Judge Peterson's courtroom. One elderly black man described being given a 30-day sentence for a parking violation when white defendants received only fines. A Hispanic woman explained how her request for a translator had been repeatedly lost until she was forced to accept a plea deal she didn't fully understand. Pattern after pattern emerged, revealing not isolated incidents but a comprehensive system of discrimination. More disturbing, Eleanor discovered connections between the judge, certain officers, and local businesses that benefited from prison labor, suggesting corruption beyond mere prejudice. When Eleanor finally requested her legally mandatory phone call, Caldwell smirked. "Phones are all busy, maybe tomorrow." She calmly cited the specific statute requiring access to communication within a reasonable time frame. Caldwell's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You think knowing some fancy laws helps you here? That's cute." As he walked away, Eleanor overheard him speaking with another officer around the corner. "Need to teach that one a lesson about how things work in Westbrook. Too smart for her own good." The other officer laughed. "County jail'll fix that attitude." Real quick. Eleanor's pulse quickened slightly. The situation was escalating beyond courthouse detention. She had anticipated experiencing common procedural violations, not potentially dangerous conditions, at a facility notorious for inmate mistreatment. Still, she remained committed to her investigation, strategizing how to document everything while protecting herself from escalating threats. 3 hours into Eleanor's detention, an unexpected call reached the Westbrook County Courthouse. Justice David Chen, Eleanor's colleague on the Supreme Court, had grown concerned when she missed their scheduled briefing. Following protocol for the Judicial Transparency Project, he called the courthouse asking generally if any researchers were visiting today. Court Administrator Rebecca Martinez took the call, initially providing only standard responses. However, Chen's increasing specificity about a Dr. Johnson conducting authorized observations raised Martinez's suspicions. After hanging up, she accessed the National Judicial Database, searching for Eleanor Washington. The Chief Justice's official photograph appeared alongside her biography. Martinez gasped, looking back and forth between the screen and the holding cell's surveillance monitor. The distinguished woman sitting calmly in detention was unmistakably the highest-ranking judicial officer in the United States. Martinez approached the holding cell area with a mix of horror and professionalism, requesting a private moment with Dr. Johnson. Once alone in a small interview room, Martinez spoke in a hushed, urgent tone. "Are you Chief Justice Eleanor Washington of the Supreme Court?" Eleanor studied the administrator carefully before giving a single, measured nod. "I am. I'd appreciate your discretion, Ms. Martinez. I'm conducting a confidential investigation into judicial practices." Martinez's hand trembled slightly. The way they've treated you, this is catastrophic." Eleanor leaned forward. "It's precisely what happens to ordinary citizens every day in this courthouse. That's why my identity must remain confidential until I've completed my observation." After a moment's hesitation, Martinez agreed to help, promising to expedite Eleanor's release without revealing her identity. Bailiff Caldwell observed their private conversation through the interview room's window, his suspicion growing as he noted Martinez's deferential body language toward a woman who should have been just another contempt case. When Martinez began processing release paperwork, Caldwell immediately reported to Judge Peterson, who summoned the court administrator to his chambers. "What exactly are you doing, Miss Martinez?" Peterson demanded. "The Johnson woman stays in custody pending additional charges." Martinez attempted to reason with him, citing improper procedure, but Peterson cut her off. "I don't care what procedural textbook you're quoting. That woman is interfering with my courtroom, and she'll learn there are consequences." The implicit threat hung in the air. Martinez retreated, unable to reveal Eleanor's identity without betraying her promise and potentially compromising the investigation. She returned to Eleanor with the bad news, whispering, "They're blocking your release. Something's very wrong here." Caldwell increased his surveillance of Eleanor, restricting her movements and interactions with other detainees. During a brief moment alone, Eleanor reached for her phone to document a particularly egregious violation, only to discover it missing from her pocket. The evidence she'd gathered throughout the morning was gone, likely confiscated during processing. The loss was a significant setback, but Eleanor's trained memory had already preserved the essential details. Martinez managed to slip Eleanor a burner phone during a bathroom escort, nearly getting caught by Caldwell, who seemed increasingly determined to isolate her. "They're watching you specifically," Martinez whispered. "Be careful." Using the hidden phone, Eleanor documented key observations in an encrypted note, capturing the systematic violations she'd witnessed firsthand. The situation grew more complex as Eleanor realized the corruption extended far beyond Caldwell and Peterson. It appeared to involve an entire network of officials protecting each other's misconduct. The atmosphere in the courthouse shifted palpably. When County Sheriff William Bryant arrived, his reputation for racial profiling preceding him. Bryant's department had faced multiple federal investigations, all mysteriously dropped before reaching conclusion. His presence at the courthouse for a simple contempt case was unusual and concerning. Eleanor overheard Bryant speaking with Peterson and Caldwell, their hushed tones and frequent glances in her direction, suggesting she had become a person of particular interest. Martinez passed by quickly, whispering, "They've called in the sheriff. This isn't normal protocol. Something's happening." Eleanor maintained her composed exterior while internally reassessing the situation. What had begun as a routine observation had evolved into something far more dangerous and potentially far more significant for judicial reform. If officials were willing to risk such obvious procedural violations, what might they do when truly threatened? What would you do if you discovered corruption in a place meant to uphold justice? Comment number 1. If you believe our legal system should work the same for everyone, regardless of race or background. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to support stories that expose the painful truths about our justice system. Will Eleanor's true identity remain hidden as the sheriff enters the picture? Can she gather enough evidence before these corrupt officials realize exactly who they're dealing with? And what will happen when they discover they've been mistreating the most powerful judge in America? The answers await in our next segment, where the danger escalates and a small-town conspiracy begins to unravel. The moment Eleanor was left alone in the holding cell, she immediately put Martinez's burner phone to use, accessing legal databases through an encrypted browser. Judge Peterson's case history revealed a disturbing statistical anomaly that couldn't be explained by coincidence. Black defendants consistently received sentences 3 times longer than white defendants for identical crimes, even when controlling for prior records and severity. The pattern was so pronounced that it could only be deliberate. More troubling, Eleanor discovered Peterson had dismissed every single police misconduct case brought before him in the past decade. 100% dismissal rate. No judicial officer could achieve such consistency without intentional bias. Digging deeper, Eleanor uncovered financial connections between Peterson, Caldwell, and Sheriff Bryant. All 3 men were listed as founding members of the Westbrook Heritage Society, which public records revealed was a thinly disguised white supremacist organization that had rebranded itself after civil rights investigations in the 1990s. The society owned significant shares in private prison corporations operating in neighboring counties and had donated substantial sums to politicians who supported harsh sentencing laws. Eleanor quietly sent these findings to her secure Supreme Court server and contacted her security team, using coded language that would alert them to her situation without revealing her location. She requested delayed intervention, determined to gather comprehensive evidence before revealing her identity. Sheriff Bryant entered the detention area like he owned it, which in many ways he did. His imposing frame and cold eyes suggested a man accustomed to intimidating others into submission. "So you're the troublemaker," he said, pulling up a chair and sitting uncomfortably close to Eleanor. "Disrupting court proceedings. Resisting. Arrest, and now I hear you've been asking questions about our sentencing practices. That sounds like interference with judicial process. 5 years minimum. The threat was delivered with chilling casualness. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. Interesting interpretation of the law, Sheriff. I'd be curious to know which statute you're referencing. Bryant's smile never reached his eyes. Around here, I am the law, Dr. Johnson. You're not in Washington now. The specific reference to Washington sent a chill through Eleanor. Did he know who she was, or was he simply assuming she was from the capital? The public defender assigned to Eleanor's case arrived looking exhausted and overwhelmed. Sarah Johnson introduced herself with a defeated handshake, her case files threatening to spill from her overloaded briefcase. They've added interference with judicial procedure and evidence tampering to your charges, she explained. When Eleanor asked what evidence she'd allegedly tampered with, Johnson shrugged helplessly. They're claiming you attempted to delete courthouse security footage. It doesn't have to make sense, it just has to sound plausible enough for Peterson to sign off on it. During their consultation, Johnson revealed the systematic corruption that paralyzed Westbrook's justice system. They've been rigging juries for years. Any potential juror who might question police testimony mysteriously gets dismissed. Evidence gets planted regularly. I've filed dozens of complaints that disappear into thin air. She lowered her voice. Last defender who pushed too hard ended up with drug charges, lost his license. From her holding cell, Eleanor witnessed officers planting evidence in Jamal's personal belongings, slipping a small bag of white powder into his jacket while he was being questioned in another room. She carefully recorded the incident using the burner phone, documenting badge numbers and timestamps. The casual efficiency with which they conducted the fraud suggested a routine practice rather than an isolated incident. Eleanor's outrage grew, but her judicial training kept her focused on gathering evidence rather than intervening prematurely. That discipline was tested when she overheard Sheriff Bryant speaking to Judge Peterson in the corridor. Had my tech guy run her prints? Something weird came up in the system. Shows a partial match to someone named Eleanor Washington in a federal database, but the access is restricted. Think this lady stole someone's identity? Peterson scoffed. Probably. Add identity theft to her charges. Let's transfer her to county. Tonight. She can enjoy our accommodations while we sort this out. The mention of county jail accelerated Eleanor's timeline. Westbrook County Jail had 3 inmate deaths in the past year alone, all under suspicious circumstances, all ruled suicides despite evidence suggesting otherwise. Bryant returned, his demeanor noticeably colder. Got some interesting information about you, Doctor. Seems you might be using a stolen identity. Care to tell me who you really are? Eleanor maintained her composure. My identification is accurate and legitimate, Sheriff. Perhaps your database access is incomplete. Bryant leaned in menacingly. We'll have plenty of time to discuss it. At county. I've arranged for your transfer tonight. Some of my best deputies will be handling your transport personally. The implied threat hung in the air between them. Eleanor recognized she was running out of time. She needed to get word to the Supreme Court about her exact location and situation, but with Bryant's heightened suspicion, any communication attempt carried significant risk. The stakes had escalated beyond professional curiosity or even judicial oversight. Eleanor now faced potential physical danger from a system that operated with impunity against those it sought to control. Twilight cast long shadows across the courthouse parking lot as Eleanor was led toward the prisoner transport van, her wrists still bound in painfully tight handcuffs. Bailiff Caldwell seized the opportunity for one final act of cruelty deliberately, jerking her restraints upward as he transferred custody to the transport officers. Hoops, he smirked as Eleanor winced involuntarily. Accident. The sharp pain shooting through her wrist suggested possible sprain or worse, but she maintained her dignified silence. Deputy Francis Wilson, a burly officer with cold eyes, took custody with a rough shove toward the vehicle. Got a special one here, boys. The professor thinks she knows more about law than Judge Peterson. The other deputies laughed as Eleanor was loaded into the van alongside 5 other detainees, all minorities, all looking resigned to whatever mistreatment awaited them. The transport van pulled away from the courthouse, but Eleanor's judicial Eye for detail immediately noticed they weren't following the standard route to the county detention center. Instead of turning north toward the highway, Deputy Wilson drove south deeper into rural backroads. The other detainees noticed too, exchanging anxious glances as the paved roads gave way to gravel, then dirt. A young Hispanic woman began silently, crying, while an elderly black man closed his eyes in what looked like prayer. Eleanor calculated options, fully aware of the stories about detainees who fell during transport or attempted escape in remote locations. Through the small barred window, she tracked their location against mental maps of the county, noting they were heading toward an area locally known as Redemption Woods, an isolated forest with a history dating back to Klan activities in the previous century. The van lurched to a stop in a clearing surrounded by dense pine trees, no other vehicles or buildings visible in any direction. "Everybody out," Wilson ordered, sliding open the side door. When a detainee asked why they were stopping, Wilson responded with a casual threat. "Questioning an officer's orders? That's resisting." Most detainees complied immediately, but Eleanor remained seated. "Deputy Wilson, this is not the county detention center," she stated clearly for the record, aware her hidden phone was still recording. Transporting detainees to an unauthorized location violates Department Policy Section 4.13 and State Law Code 1728B. Wilson's expression darkened dangerously. "Get out of the van now, or I'll drag you out." Eleanor continued calmly. "I am lodging a formal protest against this procedural violation. I will comply under duress, but I am not consenting to this deviation from lawful practice." Wilson and another deputy forcibly removed Eleanor from the van, their grips leaving bruises on her arms. The other detainees stood in a frightened cluster as the deputies formed a loose circle around them. Wilson approached a young black man who had been arrested for a disputed traffic violation, shoving him hard enough to send him sprawling in the dirt. "This is what happens to people who don't respect the law in Westbrook County," Wilson announced, drawing his baton. Eleanor moved forward instantly. "Stop, this is assault. You are being recorded and this will be reported." The deputy spun toward her, baton raised. Before he could strike, Eleanor twisted her body to protect the hidden phone while bracing for impact. The blow caught her across the shoulders, sending her to her knees. Pain radiated through her upper body, but she remained conscious and alert, ensuring the recording continued while memorizing each deputy's face and badge number. Just as the situation seemed poised to escalate further, the unexpected sound of a vehicle approaching caused the deputies to pause. Court Clerk Thomas Hawkins pulled up in a county vehicle, stepping out with obvious confusion. "Wilson, what the hell are you doing?" "Sheriff Bryant sent me to make sure the prisoners arrived at county without incident." Hawkins surveyed the scene, genuine shock registering on his face. "This isn't the route to county. Why are these people out of the van?" Wilson fumbled for an explanation about vehicle trouble, but Hawkins wasn't buying it. His eyes met Eleanor's briefly, a flash of recognition suggesting he might suspect her true identity. "Get these people back in the van immediately," Hawkins ordered with unexpected authority. "I'm following you directly to county. No more unscheduled stops." The deputies complied reluctantly, roughly loading everyone back into the transport vehicle. As the van finally proceeded toward its official destination, Eleanor reassessed the players in this unfolding drama. Hawkins' intervention suggested not everyone in the Westbrook system was corrupt, or at least not corrupt in the same way. His apparent shock at the deputies' actions indicated potential divisions within the courthouse hierarchy. Eleanor made mental note of this potential ally while checking her injuries as discreetly as possible. The burner phone had survived, still recording, but her shoulder throbbed where the baton had struck, and her wrist had swollen significantly from Caldwell's accident. Through the pain, she maintained her judicial analysis, recognizing that the transport deputies had escalated from procedural violations to explicit criminal behavior. This expanded the scope of potential charges significantly, from administrative misconduct to criminal conspiracy and civil rights violations carrying federal penalties. The implications were growing far beyond what she had initially anticipated when starting her courthouse observation that morning. Have you ever witnessed someone abuse their authority when they thought nobody was watching? Comment number 1. If you believe body cams should be mandatory for all law enforcement to prevent exactly these kinds of abuses, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you believe in accountability for every official, regardless of their position or power. How far will these corrupt deputies go to protect their broken system? Will Eleanor's hidden recordings survive to expose their crimes? And what will happen when she finally reaches the notorious Westbrook County Jail, where even more dangerous players await? Stay with us as this Chief Justice's undercover mission becomes a fight for justice and survival. Westbrook County Jail loomed like a fortress of despair, its grey concrete walls stained with decades of neglect. Unlike the historic courthouse with its performative grandeur, the jail made no pretense about its purpose: containment and punishment, not rehabilitation. Eleanor was processed through intake by Officer Heather Dixon, a thin woman whose bored expression never changed as she deliberately misplaced Eleanor's request for medical attention for her injured wrist. "Computer's running slow today," Dixon drawled, visibly deleting Eleanor's medical information from the intake form. "We'll get to your injuries eventually." The quotation marks were audible in her tone, making clear she considered the complaint fabricated. Eleanor noted the violation of mandatory medical screening protocols, adding it to her growing mental catalogue of infractions. The women's holding cell was dangerously overcrowded, with 23 detainees packed into a space designed for 12. Most were black or Hispanic, many showing visible signs of distress or illness. The air reeked of disinfectant, barely masking human waste from the exposed toilet. Eleanor found a small space on a bench beside a woman in her 30s who introduced herself as Victoria Brooks. "First time in Westbrook?" Victoria asked, noting Eleanor's careful observation of their surroundings. When Eleanor nodded, Victoria continued, "I'm in for drug possession, except the drugs weren't mine. Got pulled over with my boyfriend. They found his prescription pills and charged me instead because I have a record. He's white, I'm not. Simple as that." As they talked, Victoria revealed the jail's darker secrets. 3 detainees had died under mysterious circumstances in the past year, all ruled suicides despite witness accounts of guard involvement. Official report, always, says the same thing. No evidence of foul play, but we all know what happened. During evening medication distribution, a corrections officer named James Sullivan paused at Eleanor, studying her face with growing recognition. "Dr. Johnson?" he asked quietly. Later, he returned during his rounds, lingering at their cell. "We had constitutional law together at Georgetown," he whispered. "You were a visiting professor. I never forgot your lectures on judicial ethics." Eleanor carefully maintained her cover while acknowledging the connection. Sullivan's internal conflict was visible. His law degree had somehow led him to this job in a corrupt system, and recognizing Eleanor had triggered his dormant professional ethics. "Things aren't right here," he admitted. "I've filed reports. That disappear. Tried transferring 3 times and got blocked." Eleanor seized the opportunity, quietly developing Sullivan as a potential ally. "Documentation is everything," she murmured. "Times, dates, badge numbers, specific incidents." Sullivan nodded almost imperceptibly before moving on to avoid suspicion. When a detainee with obvious appendicitis symptoms began crying in pain, Eleanor approached guard Lisa Morgan to request medical attention. "Medical's closed for the night," Morgan responded without looking up from her magazine. "She can see the nurse in the morning if she's still complaining." Eleanor cited specific regulations requiring emergency medical response, which earned her only a cold stare. "You want to join her in medical isolation? Keep talking." The threat was clear, and Eleanor reluctantly retreated, documenting the interaction. Hours later, the situation escalated when a young woman was dragged from her cell for disrespect after requesting water. Through the cell door, Eleanor witnessed 4 guards throw the woman against the wall, one pressing a forearm against her throat while others jeered. "Stop, you're violating her 8th Amendment protection," Eleanor called out. The guards froze momentarily, unaccustomed to detainees citing specific constitutional provisions. Their surprise quickly turned to anger as they approached Eleanor's cell. "Looks like we have a jailhouse lawyer," sneered Officer Raymond Parker, the night shift supervisor with a reputation for brutality. "Maybe you need a private legal consultation." The other guards chuckled at the implicit threat as Parker unlocked the cell door. Before they could remove Eleanor, Sullivan appeared with perfect timing. "Captain wants all movement logged tonight, special directive." He held up an official-looking clipboard. "Got paperwork for this extraction?" Parker hesitated, unwilling to create a paper trail for what he'd been planning. "We'll come back for her," he muttered before relocking the cell. Later, Sullivan slipped Eleanor a note warning of a planned cell extraction during shift change when surveillance was typically lightest. "Document everything," the note concluded. "They're planning to teach you a lesson." Eleanor quickly organized her cellmates, explaining how to serve as witnesses and remember specific details that would hold up in court. Victoria and others positioned themselves strategically, prepared to observe whatever might happen. An unanticipated development occurred when a jail informant overheard Eleanor instructing the other women on their legal rights. The informant, seeking favorable treatment, reported to administration that Dr. Johnson seemed unusually knowledgeable about federal law and bore a striking resemblance to someone she'd seen on television. Sheriff Bryant was contacted immediately. After reviewing security footage, Bryant ordered a middle-of-the-night special operation. "Get her into isolation now," he commanded. "No paperwork, no witnesses, no calls. Something's not right about this woman, and we need to find out who she really is before anyone else talks to her." At 2:17 a.m., a team of officers in full tactical gear entered the women's holding area, proceeding directly to Eleanor. "Special Housing Unit transfer," the HIE team leader announced. "No questions, no resistance." Eleanor memorized each officer's name badge as they escorted her through rarely used corridors to the jail's most restricted section. Her judicial mind continued cataloging violations, even as her concern for her physical safety intensified. The isolation unit awaited, a place where detainees often disappeared from public view and accountability. The isolation cell was a study in sensory manipulation, windowless concrete walls, a metal slab for a bed, and lights that remained harshly bright regardless of time. Eleanor was denied her right to personal belongings, even the standard-issue blanket and hygiene items. The purpose was obvious to her trained mind: disorientation and psychological breakdown. The lights remained on 24/7, making sleep nearly impossible. Meals arrived at irregular intervals, sometimes just hours apart, sometimes with nearly a day between them. Water was provided sparingly and often deliberately spilled by guards before she could drink adequately. Eleanor recognized these tactics from her work on cases involving enhanced interrogation techniques, methods designed to break resistance without leaving visible marks. She employed judicial mindfulness techniques, learned during her years of meditation practice, using breath control and mental discipline to maintain clarity despite the deliberate sleep deprivation. Officer Sullivan risked his position to check on Eleanor during his shifts, providing small kindnesses that maintained her resilience: an extra cup of water, accurate information about time, brief moments of respectful human interaction. During one such visit, he whispered, "I contacted Justice Chen, used a burner phone from outside the county. They know where you are." The news strengthened Eleanor's resolve. Sullivan's risk-taking demonstrated that even within corrupt systems, individuals of conscience could make critical differences. Eleanor carefully tracked time by counting Sullivan's shift changes, maintaining her mental acuity by reviewing Supreme Court precedents in her mind, and planning the extensive judicial reforms this experience would inform. Despite her isolation, Eleanor was transforming her ordeal into a blueprint for systemic change that would eventually impact every courthouse in America. Sheriff Bryant personally interrogated Eleanor on the third day of her isolation, entering her cell with 2 deputies positioned to intimidate. "Let's cut the games," he began, tossing a file onto the metal bed. "Your fingerprints partially match someone in a restricted federal database. That's national security territory. So either you're using stolen identification or you're not who you claim to be. Start talking." Eleanor met his gaze steadily, her voice calm despite her physical exhaustion. I've committed no crime, Sheriff Bryant. My detention is unlawful, and the conditions of my confinement violate multiple federal statutes. Bryant leaned closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I can make this all go away. Sign an NDA saying nothing inappropriate happened during your time in our jurisdiction, and you walk out today. Otherwise, people disappear in systems all the time. Paperwork gets lost, computer records get corrupted. Who'd miss one troublemaker? Court Administrator Martinez attempted to visit Eleanor after learning of her transfer to isolation. A highly unusual move for a simple contempt case. Her request was immediately denied, and she was summarily suspended for insubordination when she questioned the decision. The swift punishment served its purpose, sending a clear message to any other courthouse staff who might consider challenging the status quo. Meanwhile, local journalist Michael Robinson had begun investigating a tip about a missing researcher at the courthouse. Initial inquiries led nowhere until Robinson connected with Victoria Brooks, released on bail through a community fund. Victoria's description of the mysterious Dr. Johnson and her unusual legal knowledge piqued Robinson's interest. His preliminary research uncovered the coincidental timing of a Supreme Court justice's unexplained absence from scheduled appearances. Though circumstantial, the connection was too intriguing to ignore. Evidence from Eleanor's hidden recordings had begun circulating online after Justice Chen activated emergency protocols. Redacted versions protecting detainee identities appeared on legal advocacy websites, showing clear civil rights violations by Westbrook officials. Sheriff Bryant panicked upon discovering the leaks, unable to determine their source. In a hastily called meeting with Judge Peterson and Bailiff Caldwell, Bryant proposed an immediate solution. We need to transfer her somewhere off the books until we figure out what we're dealing with. My cousin has property in the next county. No paperwork, no witnesses. Peterson blanched. That's crossing a line, Will. Administrative violations are one thing, but what you're suggesting, Bryant cut him off. You think this woman is just going to go away quietly after what she's seen? After what Caldwell did to her in open court? We're already across that line. The night guard Tanya Williams had observed the escalating situation with growing concern. Unlike many colleagues who had become desensitized to the jail's culture, Williams maintained her moral compass. When she overheard Bryant's plans for an extrajudicial transfer, she made a critical decision. During her shift, she smuggled a bottle of water and a note to Eleanor. They're moving you tomorrow at 4 a.m. Federal marshals know. Hold on. The simple act of conscience provided Eleanor crucial tactical information and renewed strength. She prepared mentally for the coming confrontation, knowing that whatever happened in the next 24 hours would likely determine not just her fate, but the future of judicial accountability in Westbrook County. The transfer could be legitimate, bringing her into federal protection, or it could be Bryant's attempt to disappear her permanently. Either way, Eleanor Washington, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, would face it with the same unwavering commitment to justice that had defined her entire career. Would you risk your safety to stand up against corruption? Comment number 1. If you believe that sometimes one person's courage can change an entire system, hit the like button and subscribe if you value those who fight for justice, even when it comes at personal cost. What will happen during Eleanor's high-risk transfer? Will the federal authorities arrive in time to protect their Chief Justice? And when Eleanor's true identity is finally revealed, how will these corrupt officials react to learning they've been abusing the most powerful judge in America? The climax of this extraordinary story of courage and accountability continues in our next segment, where justice finally begins to turn the tables. While Eleanor prepared for the high-risk transfer, Justice David Chen had mobilized an unprecedented federal response. Working directly with the Attorney General's office, Chen secured emergency deployment of U.S. Marshals to Westbrook County. FBI agent Carlos Ramirez, a veteran specialist in civil rights violations, coordinated the operation from a temporary command center in a neighboring county. Their plan was strategically sound: serve a federal warrant during Eleanor's scheduled court hearing, ensuring maximum witnesses and documentation. We'll intercept at the courthouse during morning transport, Ramirez instructed his team. Clean extraction by the book, Remember who we're recovering." The agents nodded solemnly, fully aware that their mission involved the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Martinez had managed to pass critical information to Eleanor through Sullivan before her suspension took effect. "Federal team incoming, scheduled for courthouse appearance tomorrow. Hold tight." The message renewed Eleanor's determination to endure the isolation tactics that had intensified as her transfer approached. Sheriff Bryant, increasingly paranoid about the online evidence leaks, had ordered constant lighting, random loud noises, and temperature manipulation in her cell, classic sleep deprivation techniques. Despite these efforts, Eleanor maintained her mental clarity through meditation, techniques, and her unwavering commitment to justice. Each violation she experienced would eventually inform landmark reforms in detention practices nationwide, transforming her suffering into systemic change. The transfer began at 3:42 a.m., 18 minutes earlier than scheduled, a deliberate deviation designed to evade potential oversight. 4 deputies in tactical gear entered Eleanor's cell, refusing to identify themselves or state their destination. "Transport detail. On your feet." Eleanor committed each face to memory as they secured her with excessive restraints, handcuffs, ankle shackles, and a waist chain typically reserved for violent offenders. The deputies maintained complete silence as they escorted her through back corridors, avoiding the jail's standard processing areas and surveillance cameras. Eleanor noted each procedural violation while projecting calm confidence. "I'm documenting this unauthorized transport," she stated clearly. "Each of you will be identified in federal proceedings." A deputy snorted dismissively, unaware of exactly how accurate her statement would prove. Sheriff Bryant's suspicions had grown exponentially. After discovering partial matches between Dr. Johnson's prints and restricted federal databases, last-minute intelligence about federal agents in adjoining counties pushed him to change the transport route entirely. "Courthouse is compromised," he radioed the transport team. "Proceed to secondary location immediately." Instead of the expected journey to the courthouse where federal marshals waited, Eleanor found herself being driven deeper into rural Westbrook County. Through the transport van's small window, she recognized landmarks indicating they were heading toward private property rather than any official facility. The tactical deviation had successfully evaded the federal extraction team, leaving Eleanor temporarily beyond reach of legitimate authorities. The realization settled heavily. This wasn't a legal transfer, but something far more ominous. Bailiff Caldwell had joined the transport team at the last minute, now fully aware that their detainee might be someone significant. The woman's composure, despite days of isolation tactics, had unnerved him, and the rapid escalation of resources devoted to her case suggested serious implications. "Who is she really?" he demanded as they traveled the rural route. The transport team leader shrugged. "Bryant's keeping it tight. Says she's using a stolen identity, might be foreign intelligence." Caldwell studied Eleanor through the security grate, noticing for the first time subtle details he'd overlooked before. Her perfect posture despite exhaustion, the evaluative intelligence in her eyes, the way she observed and catalogued every detail of her surroundings. Cold unease settled in his stomach as he reconsidered their interactions at the courthouse. Sheriff Bryant had gathered his most loyal officers for an emergency strategy session at his private hunting lodge, the secondary location, far from official scrutiny. "We've got a major problem," he announced bluntly. "This woman has connections, federal-level connections. Someone's leaked recordings from her time in custody, and they're damaging." He paced nervously, a man watching his control unravel. I need to contain this situation permanently." The implication hung heavily in the air until Deputy Wilson voiced the unthinkable. "What exactly are you suggesting, Sheriff?" Bryant's response was chilling in its bureaucratic detachment. An unfortunate escape attempt requiring appropriate force, clean by the book documentation afterward. Several officers exchanged uncomfortable glances, the line they were being asked to cross suddenly very clear. Caldwell broke the tense silence. "Without knowing who she really is, that's too risky. What if she's actually federal? We'd be looking at life sentences." His objection created an immediate division among the assembled officers, those willing to follow Bryant regardless, and those hesitating at the prospect of potential murder charges. Eleanor observed the fracturing unity with keen judicial assessment, identifying potential leverage points. While they argued among themselves, she tested her restraints systematically, finding the left cuff slightly looser than the right. The division among her captors presented a strategic opportunity that might not come again. Using techniques learned. During a judicial security training course, Eleanor methodically worked the loose cuff while keeping her expression neutral, giving no indication of her progress. During a shift change between guard positions, Eleanor executed her move with precision. Using the momentary gap in visual coverage, she slipped her left hand free and quickly accessed the universal restraint key Sullivan had concealed in the hem of her jail uniform. Within seconds, she had released all restraints and moved silently toward the lodge's rear exit. The property's layout, visible during their arrival, had revealed a service road with vehicles parked approximately 60 yards from the building. Eleanor moved quietly through pre-dawn darkness, almost reaching an unattended patrol car when a security light suddenly illuminated the area. Prisoner escape. Caldwell's voice shattered the silence. Eleanor sprinted toward the vehicle, managing to open the door before Bryant tackled her from behind, driving her hard into the gravel driveway. The impact reopened wounds from her earlier mistreatment and created new injuries. Bryant's subsequent assault crossed every professional and legal boundary as he struck Eleanor repeatedly, his frustration and fear manifesting as uncontrolled rage. "Who are you?" he demanded between blows. "Who sent you to investigate us?" Eleanor protected her vital organs while maintaining consciousness, determined to survive as a witness. Officer Sullivan, who had insisted on joining the transport team, citing procedural requirements, intervened physically. "Sheriff, stop. This is a detainee in custody. You're committing a felony." Bryant shoved him aside, but the interruption broke his violent rhythm. Other officers restrained Bryant, not from concern for Eleanor but fear of liability. As Eleanor was roughly secured with fresh restraints, Sullivan whispered, "Robinson knows your location. Help is coming." Bryant, regaining his composure, made a decision that sealed his fate. Prepare for immediate relocation. No documentation, no witnesses. Michael Robinson had built his journalistic career on exposing corruption in small-town power structures, but nothing had prepared him for the magnitude of the story unfolding in Westbrook County. Armed with information from Sullivan, documentation from Eleanor's leaked recordings and testimony from released detainees, Robinson published a digital bombshell: Supreme Court Chief Justice held captive in Georgia courthouse. The article featured redacted images from Eleanor's recordings showing clear civil rights violations and included damning quotes from multiple sources. What began as a routine judicial observation has exposed a systemic pattern of racism, corruption, and abuse of power throughout Westbrook County's justice system, Robinson wrote. Multiple sources confirm the detained researcher is actually Chief Justice Eleanor Washington, the highest-ranking judicial officer in the United States. The story exploded across media platforms, transforming from local news to national crisis within hours. Cable news networks interrupted regular programming for breaking coverage. Social media platforms were flooded with hashtags demanding action. The Supreme Court, initially hesitant to confirm details for security reasons, issued a formal statement. The court is aware of reports regarding Chief Justice Washington and is working with appropriate federal authorities to ensure her safety. The court calls for her immediate release and full cooperation from local officials. The governor of Georgia, blindsided by the scandal, ordered emergency investigations into Westbrook County operations and activated state police to secure relevant evidence. Washington politicians from both parties united in rare bipartisan outrage, demanding immediate federal intervention. Sheriff Bryant attempted desperate damage control, calling an impromptu press conference outside the courthouse. "There appears to be a case of mistaken identity regarding a detainee in our custody," he claimed, sweat visibly beading on his forehead despite the cool temperature. "Our records indicate the individual in question presented false identification and is not who certain media outlets are claiming." His statement collapsed under immediate questioning from assembled reporters who presented time-stamped images of Eleanor in custody. Bryant abruptly ended the press conference, retreating into the courthouse as protesters began assembling outside, their signs demanding "Justice for Justice Washington" and "End Westbrook Corruption." The public pressure was unprecedented in the county's history. Caldwell's professional self-preservation instinct had fully activated. With federal involvement inevitable, he began calculating his options for minimal personal consequences. "I'm considering cooperation with federal investigators," he informed Bryant in a private conversation. "Full testimony in exchange for reduced charges." Bryant's face darkened dangerously. "You do that, and I'll make sure everyone knows about the Miller case evidence you planted." Caldwell stood his ground. "That's one case against me. What they have now is enough to bury all of us forever. I've got a family." Their argument encapsulated the rapid disintegration of the once solid wall of silence protecting Westbrook's corrupt system. Self-interest was fracturing loyalty as consequences loomed. Meanwhile, Judge Peterson attempted to destroy incriminating sentencing records, only to discover Court Administrator Martinez had already secured digital backups before her suspension. FBI teams obtained emergency warrants for the courthouse jail and all associated digital systems, while coordinating with U.S. Marshals for a tactical approach to Bryant's private property, where intelligence indicated Eleanor was being held. Agent Ramirez coordinated the multi-agency response with methodical precision. Subject safety is absolute priority. All actions must presume hostile intent from local authorities who now realize who they're holding. Federal drones provided thermal imaging of Bryant's compound, confirming multiple armed individuals and one civilian detainee. As FBI tactical teams established a secure perimeter, they received alarming intelligence. Bryant had barricaded the property and was refusing all communication attempts. State authorities, responding to the escalating crisis, activated National Guard units to establish roadblocks preventing Bryant's potential escape with Eleanor. Eleanor continued her judicial assessment of the deteriorating situation, recognizing Bryant's increasing desperation made him both more dangerous and more vulnerable to strategic manipulation. Despite her injuries and exhaustion, she maintained her analytical focus, developing a psychological profile of each captor. When Bryant offered her a path to freedom in exchange for a public statement claiming the entire situation was a misunderstanding, Eleanor countered with surgical precision. "Sheriff Bryant, federal authorities already have substantial evidence, including recordings, witness statements, and medical documentation. Your best option now is a full confession addressing systemic issues rather than just individual actions." Her strategic framing, offering him perceived dignity through systemic acknowledgement rather than personal culpability, temporarily engaged his consideration, buying critical time as federal forces assembled outside. National media descended on Westbrook County in unprecedented numbers. Satellite trucks lining roads leading to the courthouse as reporters scrambled for any new development. The president issued an official statement. "The detention and mistreatment of Chief Justice Washington represents an unacceptable assault on judicial independence and the rule of law. I have directed all federal resources necessary to secure her safe return and ensure full accountability." Inside Bryant's compound, Eleanor heard helicopter rotors in the distance and recognized the changing tactical landscape. Sullivan managed a brief moment to update her. "Federal teams have surrounded the property. They're trying negotiation first." Eleanor nodded almost imperceptibly. "Tell them I'm stable but injured. Bryant is unstable and armed. Multiple officers are having second thoughts." This critical intelligence would shape the federal approach, prioritizing strategic patience over immediate tactical assault and potentially saving lives during the resolution. FBI negotiator Patricia Alvarez established initial contact with Bryant's compound via secured communication channels. "Sheriff Bryant, this is FBI Special Agent Alvarez. We're here to resolve this situation peacefully. We know you have Chief Justice Eleanor Washington inside." The acknowledgement of Eleanor's true identity sent visible shockwaves through officers who hadn't been fully briefed. Bryant grabbed the communication device, his composure crumbling. "This is a local jurisdiction matter. You have no authority. Here." Alvarez's response was measured but unyielding. "Sheriff, we have federal warrants for multiple individuals inside that location. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is being held against her will. There is no scenario where federal authorities don't have jurisdiction." The reality of their situation settled heavily upon everyone in the room, including Bryant himself. Bryant's behavior grew increasingly erratic as the standoff continued. He alternated between rage, bargaining, and stunned disbelief. "This can't be happening," he muttered repeatedly, pacing with his service weapon drawn. 20 years building this department, and one nosy judge destroys everything. Eleanor observed his deterioration with clinical detachment, recognizing the dangerous unpredictability of a man watching his power structure collapse. She strategically engaged his subordinates during Bryant's moments of distraction. "Each of you needs to consider your individual position now," she advised calmly. "Federal prosecutors differentiate between ringleaders and those who cooperate." Early, her judicial authority, evident even in prisoners' clothing, created a powerful psychological effect. Several deputies began distancing themselves from Bryant, physically moving to opposite sides of the room. Caldwell had reached his breaking point after hearing confirmation of Eleanor's identity. The realization that he had physically abused the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in front of dozens of witnesses, behavior captured on multiple recordings, had shattered his remaining loyalty to Bryant. During a moment when Bryant stepped outside to assess the federal positions, Caldwell used a concealed personal phone to contact the FBI negotiation team. "This is Bailiff Richard Caldwell. I want to offer testimony against Sheriff Bryant and Judge Peterson in exchange for consideration during sentencing." Agent Alvarez quickly secured his cooperation, obtaining critical information about the property layout, weapons locations, and Bryant's increasingly unstable mental state. Caldwell's defection marked the beginning of the end for Bryant's resistance. News of Judge Peterson's suicide attempt reached the compound through official channels, further destabilizing the group dynamic. Peterson had been found unconscious in his home after ingesting prescription medication with alcohol, leaving a rambling confession implicating numerous county officials in systematic civil rights violations. Though medical teams had revived him, the psychological impact of his breakdown resonated through the barricaded group. Bryant, receiving this information, recognized his position was collapsing from all sides. "It's over," one deputy stated flatly, placing his weapon on a table. Peterson folded. "Caldwell's probably talking. The feds have everything." Bryant's expression hardened into dangerous resolve. "It's not over until I say it's over." He approached Eleanor directly, drawing his service weapon. "You're my ticket out of here. They want their precious Chief Justice. They can provide helicopter transport for both of us." Eleanor had anticipated this precise scenario, having observed Bryant's psychological deterioration throughout the standoff. Drawing on crisis negotiation techniques she had studied during her time as a federal prosecutor, she engaged him with calm authority. "Sheriff Bryant, consider the tactical reality. Helicopter extraction under duress has a success rate below 9% when federal teams are involved. They have snipers positioned who will prioritize my safety over your survival. There's a better option that preserves your agency in this situation." Her deliberate use of psychological frameworks, emphasizing his autonomy rather than cornering him, temporarily engaged Bryant's rational thinking. This critical pause allowed Sullivan to create a strategic diversion, deliberately knocking over equipment that momentarily drew Bryant's attention away from Eleanor. That split-second distraction provided the tactical opening federal teams had been waiting for. Bryant, startled by the sudden noise, reflexively fired his weapon. The bullet grazed Eleanor's shoulder before embedding in the wall behind her. The gunshot triggered immediate breach protocols from the FBI tactical team. Flashbang devices temporarily disoriented everyone inside as federal agents swarmed the building from multiple entry points. Bryant, realizing he was surrounded, fired wildly toward the entering agents. Sullivan threw himself toward Eleanor, shielding her from potential crossfire and sustaining a serious wound to his upper torso in the process. The tactical team moved, with exceptional precision, neutralizing threats while minimizing casualties. Within 90 seconds, they had secured the entire building, apprehending Bryant as he attempted to reach a secondary weapon cache. Eleanor, despite her injuries, maintained complete situational awareness throughout the breach operation. She directed medical attention to Sullivan first, recognizing his sacrifice. "This officer protected me at significant personal risk. Priority medical. Intervention required." The tactical team's medic stabilized Sullivan's wound, while Eleanor, refusing immediate evacuation until she had provided critical information, briefed the team leader on other potential injured parties and evidence locations. "Document everything," she instructed with judicial authority that transcended her current physical state. Continuous chain of custody on all evidence is essential for successful prosecution. Even in this moment of personal physical trauma, her commitment to proper judicial procedure remained paramount, ensuring that justice would be served not just for her, but for everyone who had suffered under Westbrook's corrupt system. 5 days after her initial courthouse observation began, Eleanor Washington was finally free. Medical teams treated her multiple injuries, the baton bruises across her shoulders, the sprained wrist from Caldwell's accident, the graze wound from Bryant's final desperate shot. Despite doctors' insistence on immediate hospitalization, Eleanor refused to leave the scene without making a public statement. Standing before the assembled press with dignified determination, her jail uniform exchanged for borrowed FBI tactical gear, she delivered an impromptu address that would be studied in law schools for generations. "What I experienced was not unique or exceptional. It was simply the everyday reality for citizens, without power or position in systems that have normalized injustice. The difference is that I can ensure accountability where others cannot. This is not about one courthouse or one county. This is about America's promise of equal justice that remains unfulfilled for too many." 6 weeks after the dramatic rescue, Westbrook County Courthouse operated under federal oversight, its corridors busy with Justice Department investigators and reform specialists. Judge Sarah Monroe, appointed as interim replacement for the disgraced Peterson, presided over a historic hearing that had drawn national attention. The courtroom was filled beyond capacity. Journalists, civil rights observers, local citizens, and government officials all witnessed to this watershed moment in judicial accountability. Eleanor Washington entered wearing her full Chief Justice regalia, the formal black robe and judicial collar presenting a stark contrast to her previous appearance in this same space. She moved with composed dignity to the judicial observation area, the physical evidence of her ordeal still visible in her careful movements and healing injuries. Bailiff Richard Caldwell stood at attention, still performing his official duties while awaiting his own federal trial. Under his plea agreement, he continued working under strict supervision, providing essential testimony against his former colleagues. He had not yet seen Eleanor in her official capacity, as she had deliberately maintained a low profile during her recovery. Judge Monroe called the court to order. United States versus Richard Caldwell preliminary evidentiary hearing. Caldwell approached the defendant's table, confusion evident in his expression. He was supposed to be serving as bailiff for today's proceedings, not appearing as a defendant. Monroe continued, "We will now hear testimony from our primary witness. Bailiff Caldwell, please administer the oath." Eleanor rose from her seat and approached the witness stand. Caldwell, still not recognizing her in formal judicial attire, mechanically held out the Bible. "Place your left hand on the Bible. Raise your right hand and repeat after me." Eleanor complied, her eyes locked with his throughout the oath. Only as she stated her name for the record, "I, Eleanor Marie Washington, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States," did recognition dawn in Caldwell's eyes. His face drained of color as the full impact of his actions 6 weeks earlier crashed over him. Eleanor slowly removed her judicial robe, revealing the business attire beneath, similar to what she had worn during her courthouse observation. The physical transformation made her identity unmistakable, triggering audible gasps throughout the courtroom. Eleanor's testimony was comprehensive and devastating, delivered with the precision of a jurist at the height of her powers. She detailed not just her personal experience, but placed it within the context of systemic discrimination, affecting thousands of Westbrook citizens over decades. What happened to me was not an anomaly. It was simply standard operating procedure, made visible, because of my position. The true injustice is that such treatment continues daily for those without my platform or power. Her testimony incorporated statistical analysis, witness corroboration, and documentary evidence revealing patterns of judicial misconduct, evidence tampering, excessive force, and deliberate denial of constitutional rights throughout Westbrook County's justice system. After concluding her testimony, Eleanor addressed the court regarding the broader implications. This case has revealed fundamental failures requiring comprehensive reform. Accordingly, I am announcing the establishment of the Judicial Accountability Initiative, a Supreme Court program providing independent oversight of local court systems nationwide. She outlined transformative changes to court security protocols, judicial conduct standards, and detainee rights protections. Transparency is not merely aspirational, it is constitutional, she concluded. No courtroom, no matter how remote or regional, operates beyond the boundaries of equal justice under law. Her words resonated beyond Westbrook County, putting courts throughout the nation on notice that systemic discrimination would no longer hide behind jurisdictional isolation. Judge Monroe delivered swift justice following federal guidelines. Caldwell received a 15-year sentence for civil rights violations, excessive force, and official misconduct, with potential reduction based on his continuing cooperation. Sheriff Bryant, convicted on multiple felony counts including attempted murder, received 40 years without parole. Judge Peterson, having survived his suicide attempt, was sentenced to 25 years for judicial corruption and systematic rights violations spanning his entire career. The sentencing represented unprecedented accountability for judicial misconduct, establishing new precedent for prosecuting officials who abused their positions. Yet Eleanor ensured the reform extended beyond punishment, implementing structural changes to prevent similar abuses nationwide. Officer James Sullivan received formal recognition for his courage, appointed to the Oversight Committee implementing reforms in Westbrook County. His protection of Eleanor during the final confrontation, despite serious personal injury, exemplified the ethical commitment possible even within corrupted systems. Eleanor personally established education scholarships for Victoria Brooks and Jamal Taylor, supporting their aspirations while recognizing that individual generosity could not replace systemic justice. Court Administrator Rebecca Martinez resumed her position with expanded authority to implement transparency measures. The transformation of Westbrook County became a blueprint for judicial reform nationwide, its painful lessons institutionalized through training, policy, and oversight. 1 year later, Chief Justice Eleanor Washington presided over the Supreme Court case of Taylor v. Westbrook County, the culmination of Jamal Taylor's civil rights lawsuit against the system that had wrongfully detained him. The court's landmark 9-0 decision established new precedent regarding judicial misconduct, creating clear pathways for citizens to seek redress when courts themselves became instruments of injustice. Eleanor's majority opinion explicitly referenced her personal experience. When those entrusted with administering justice become perpetrators of injustice, the very foundation of our constitutional system is threatened. No badge, robe, or official position places any individual beyond accountability. The ruling fundamentally realigned power relationships between citizens and judicial systems nationwide. Eleanor's annual return to Westbrook County became a tradition, symbolizing transformation rather than trauma. The courthouse where she had once been handcuffed and abused now featured a civil rights education center, training judges, officers, and community members on constitutional protections and equal justice. Standing at the podium as honored speaker at the center's second anniversary, Eleanor addressed a diverse audience that included many who had witnessed her mistreatment. The path to justice is never complete, but it begins with the courage to see clearly, speak truthfully, and act decisively when confronted with injustice. What happened in this courthouse demonstrates both the fragility and resilience of our constitutional promises. Those promises require constant vigilance from each of us, whether we wear judicial robes or not. Her words echoed through the transformed courthouse, a powerful reminder that America's journey toward equal justice continued, one courageous step at a time. This powerful narrative teaches us that justice is not automatic. It requires vigilance, courage, and accountability. Chief Justice Washington's experience reveals how easily power can corrupt when left unchecked, creating systems where discrimination becomes standard procedure rather than exception. It demonstrates that privilege and position often shield people from experiencing the injustices others face daily. The story highlights how a single person's determination can expose entrenched corruption, but also shows that systematic change requires more than individual heroism. It needs institutional reform and collective commitment to justice. We learn that accountability must exist at every level of the justice system, from bailiffs to judges. Perhaps most importantly, this story reminds us that our legal system's promise of equal justice remains unfulfilled for many Americans based solely on their race, class, or background. True justice demands that we see clearly, speak truthfully, and act decisively when confronted with injustice, regardless of personal risk. Has anything in this story resonated with your own experiences or observations of our justice system? Comment below with a time you witnessed someone abuse their authority, or times you've seen brave individuals stand up against injustice. If you believe our courtrooms should deliver equal justice regardless of skin color or social standing, please hit that like button and subscribe to support stories that expose uncomfortable truths about our institutions. Have you ever been in a situation where revealing your identity or position might have changed how you were treated? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for joining me for this powerful journey through the darkest corners of our legal system and the transformative power of accountability. Remember, justice isn't just about legal outcomes. It's about how we treat every human being with dignity and respect. Until next time, stay vigilant and keep fighting for a more just world.